Okay. So you have the other videos in there of API demos. This one, we're going to kind of run through the Amazon data extractor because we want to be able to pull information on an Amazon product. So to get started, again, this over here in the center is going to kind of show you the different test points or the endpoints in this case. So you can either do a search result or you can look at the product details. This center part is going to set up your headers. So when you do a um, REST API request, you typically have a header which has your authentication or an API key. Sometimes it'll just be a secret key, and you typically have to sign up for this from some service. So in this case, we need to sign up for a key from this Amazon data extractor. It is free. So if we go over here to the pricing and we subscribe on this 500 for a hard limit, of course, it wants us to log in. So you'll need to create an account. And then once it's in, just use this one and subscribe. And this tells me that I can have up to 500 requests in a month. So what that means, and a lot of these services will have that, where it's free for the first 500 requests. Well, you can burn through these 500 requests really fast while you're trying to learn and understand data. So I'll kind of show you how to store some of that information so that you can pull out the pieces you want so that you're not constantly doing requests out to the end part. So we have that. We'll go ahead and subscribe. And we'll go back to our endpoint. Okay. Now that I'm subscribed, you're going to see this long rapid API key, right? And so that is my key. That's tied to my name, my user account, etc. So obviously I have to delete this when I'm done. You typically do not want to post this information anywhere because people can then make requests under your name. So right now, yes, I have a hard limit of 500 requests. But if I'm paying for one and I get past my 5,000, well, then it charges me a penny for every request. Some of these will go significantly higher depending on what you're pulling information from. So you really don't want to share that key out to anybody. You want to make sure you keep that safe. All right. Over here on the right-hand side, we're going to change this down to Python. And with Python, you have two different ways of retrieving API information. You have the HTTP client and you have requests. We're going to use requests in this class. It works a little bit easier. And you can see an example of how this would look like in your Python code in order to retrieve information. So we're going to cheat and just grab copy code. And you can also, when you actually request or have your license, you can click on example responses and you can see how this breaks out that data. So if we look at this one and we have this particular MacBook Pro is what we're doing a search for, right? We see the two ads that come back and we can see the information that comes in there. So this one's going to show a MacBook Pro, whether or not it has Prime, is it a bestseller, the URL in order to retrieve that. So if we actually grab this data out of the URL space and we pasted it up here, you can see that this is the ad for this MacBook Air 2020 that pulls in. Again, we see it's Prime and things like that. We actually have a way of pulling that information out here as Prime True, etc. So as we get there, you can also see the results. And if we do a search, it looks like they key in at least 12 results that came in from different people. Again, you always have this URL. And so if you guys remember from the INF360 class, we could use something like a web browser to where if we pulled that, we could automatically open a tab that would kick us out to this particular purchase. All right. So this will give you an example of those responses, and this allows you to kind of code against it. We're going to do this inside PyCharm. So I'm going to go ahead and start up PyCharm. And thanks for coming up with an example. This is the fun part when we can actually start chasing stuff. So
Yeah, I was going to ask about like different keywords. So you've got the URL, we've got the product price, but what if we want to know sales against a time frame? So how many sales were in January? That type of information.
gotcha. So we'll have to see if they give us any of that kind of information out of this particular data set. So from here, we're going to start with a new project. All right. And over here on the left-hand side for the beginning here, we're going to deal with just pure Python. So in this, we could call this something like API test example, something like that. And when you do this, it's going to ask you for your base interpreter. Make sure on this drop down that you pick the 12 that we installed. So we have that. Everything else you would leave exactly the same. You can go ahead and even leave this main Python welcome script to get started. So we'll create this. Now the process when we start working on mini project one will be slightly different when we build this up, but I'll have that all recorded and kind of show you how we're going to do that. It's really important when we actually start working with GitHub, again, which will happen here in mini project one, that we name things correctly and things like that. So I'll have some information up there. For now, we're just wanting to deal with a basic Python script. You know, if you were still using idle, you could use idle and knock this out and test some things. But when you do this inside PyCharm, you're going to get a whole lot more information inside of here. So when you first create a new project, it needs to create a virtual environment, which is different than what we dealt with in INF360. So in a virtual environment, what that does is create an instance of Python that only has the modules for that project. That way you're not having issues with other projects needing certain versions of other modules. So if you remember in Python, we had things like importing the web browser module, and we had to do pip install in order to get some of those modules in there. When you build a virtual environment, the pip install only ties to that one project, which is a great thing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But in the lower right-hand corner is where you can see what your current interpreter is. So when you create a new one, it created a copy of Python 12 that is meant specifically for this project. So if we click down here at the bottom and we go to Python packages, I'm just going to give you a quick tour. There is a video recording that kind of does this and kind of shows you overall. But if you look over here under install, then it takes a little bit to load on a new project, because it's setting up all the searching and everything else you can do within Python is all built into PyCharm. It's really slick. So inside PyPy, you're going to see things like setup and wheel, and you'll notice that no other modules are installed, right? Just some basic ones that are normally there. So one, for example, that we would need is requests, right? Because we want to use the requests module. So you can use Python packages to come in here into this, and we can type in requests. And then from requests, we could go ahead and install that this way. You can also click on terminal. And when you go inside your terminal, you always want to make sure this starts with this parentheses VENV. What that means is that you're in the virtual environment for your project. If that doesn't show up, then more than likely it did not create an interpreter correctly, and you have to go back and create an interpreter for that particular project. We'll go through that in more detail when we do a GitHub project because it doesn't install an interpreter by default. But when you create a new project like we did here, it automatically sets all that up for you. So from here, we could do a pip install, and we're going to install requests. And requests is just a module in Python that allows us to interact with get and post requests within a REST API. You could use it to pull pages down. You may have remembered it from the web scraping section within INF360. We had to do the same thing with requests. So it will install requests. It also installs some ancillary packages that may be necessary in order to get websites. All right. So this main.py, this is just a generic example they give you to get started. We're going to go ahead and take that out. And whoops, I had already copied that other thing. So we're going to go back to our API, and we're going to steal this code snippet that it provides us. Okay. So in this code snippet, we import our request module. We have the URL that we're actually requesting this information from. So notice this is set up here. We have our query string. Now in the query string, the only thing we need to use this search from them is to set up this API that goes through here, right? We just need to pass our API key through. You typically have a headers, in which case you need to pass an API key through here, as well as the host that you're pulling this from. And this will vary depending on what API you're working with. They almost always give you this information to get you started. All right. So here we're going to set up a response, and that response is going to use a get to pull this information. We need to pass in the URL. Whoops, back here. We need to pass in this URL at the top, the headers, and the parameters that we want to get access information from. So up here, you'll notice in this search that it already has the Apple MacBook Pro up here as a search. We may want to take that out if we wanted to have the user type in a search on Amazon, right? So for example, if I take that part out, we just have search, we have our API key, and those are all copied over. And then say we wanted to get that from the user, we could do something like print, what product do you want to search for? And we do our simple get like we did before. So we could say product equals input. We can just get that from the user here. And then based on that product, we need to add that to that URL up above here. So when we do this response, we don't want to set up this response yet. We want this after we gather that product. And we will say URL plus product. And we're going to basically concatenate those two strings together, right? So we're going to take in this URL, and then whatever the user types in after that, we are going to concatenate that to that URL and pass it on through. Okay. This print response.json, anything we get back from the user is going to come in JSON format. And JSON format is essentially just like a dictionary in Python. So we'll want to load that and use that very similarly. Instead of printing this out, we're going to do a change here and save this to result. So result equals this response.json. And what that allows us to do is now have this variable called result so that we can pull things out of result. And right off the bat, we're just going to print result. So it's very similar to what we just did, but we'll play more with this data as we go. Okay. So we have this, we have our headers, we have our search. This is just complaining for blank lines. We can go ahead and run this code. So we can hit this play button up here at the top. And it'll ask what product do we want to search for. And so say we search for key, for some example, keys. Okay, so we're going to get some errors here, and let's take a look here. It's all based on SSL issues. So max retries, keys, search. This sometimes happens with an SSL verification certificate not valid for, okay. Well, let's go back here. Instead of this, let's put in our keys and see if anything changed. It should not. So if we click test endpoint here, this should allow us to test this code that we were running. And we should get a results over here on the right, which we did, in which case we have our results for doing a search on there. That SSL that we got was a certificate issue. Let's see here. Hostname mismatch. We found the one that's going to be a fun example here. All right, let's try this. So if I do, let's try to figure out where this error is coming from. So we have Amazon data extractor API, and let's just do a quick search for an SSL error. I'm guessing we need to set up a particular certificate. All right, so this is Alpha Advantage, get a handshake error. Global request get. Okay, so we could pass in this verify false, and that may make sure that we're not getting an SSL certificate. So let's see if that works. Yeah, let's do keys. Okay, so it's warning that we're getting data from an invalid certificate, but not necessarily causing a problem. If we actually wanted to do that, we would need to add the SSL certificate. So the particular host that we're getting this from is HTTPS, and the certificate that they're issuing for this isn't quite valid, but we can bypass that with this verify equals false. Okay. So if we look at this result, you'll notice we have this dictionary. And of course, this is going to be a ton of information that runs off the screen. You guys remember how to print things out from dictionaries nice and easily?
The pretty print.
There you go. So if we import pretty print, and then instead of printing this result, let's go ahead and pprint that. And then let's run this code again. All right, so we put in our keys. And there you go. So now we get all this information back about this particular end piece, and each one of these is all kind of broken out. You can kind of see this here. So we would have to kind of organize this data to see what is it we truly want to pull out. Now, what's nice about this is all in JSON format as we're kind of digging through here. So you can take this out and look at this like in a new file, which is what I suggest you do when you first get this. So we may go like file, new, and we want, I'm sorry, that's not what I wanted. If you come over here to your project on this API test, right click, go to new and file, and you can just call this example, and then you can paste that in. That allows you to kind of search through what you're getting back out of that user, so that we can gather information from it. Notice I've already ran this particular execution like 4 times. So I tested it once, I got an SSL error. I tested it again, I got this. Well, then we didn't get the pretty print format out the way we wanted. So I already burned 5 of my 500 requests, right? So when you're first testing, you kind of want to get some example data back and then start seeing more of what you want to get. So if you want to dive into the ads, we're probably not so interested in the ads section. And that's the reason they give you these results out here on Rapid API. It's a lot easier to look through. You can see where they're all expanded. You can kind of condense these down and look. So instead of ads, let's look at the results. And you can see we ended up with 62 items in the results, right? If we come through here and we look for this project, you can see the first one that comes in. Here's where they have the price, which is kind of the information you were looking at before, right? Um, there you go. And these are the different pagination of the different items that they got back. Okay. So we can see what it sold for, and we can see price as a string, and we can see price as an actual integer, right? In this case, it'd be a float. That way you can see the price symbol depending on, what country it returned the result from. They may be selling it in a different one. So say our question is we wanted to return the top 10 results of searching for keys, with the URLs for each one of those going through there, right? So we would go through results, and we would need to do a for loop through the results to figure out what we got back. So we know we get this result back, and we could say for product, or let's say for product result in, and then result dot, and then we know what we want to pull in. So that first one that we want to go into, you have ads, and then you also have your results. So we want to look in our results, right? And inside results, you have all these different options that come in down here, and you're going to have a list of all these results that come in here. And we typically just want to pull the first 10, right? So for now, we're just going to pull the first result. And of that first result, we want to go grab this string here, which is the URL. And so what we typed in here is going to get us the result of that URL for that first one. So let's not look at for now. Let's just print this one result. And let's not worry about pretty printing. And let's just run that one more time. And so we say keys. There you go. It gave us back a URL on this. And again, if we did import web browser, We could also say instead of printing it, we could just send it to web browser and take this result, right? And we need to install web browser. So we go out here to the terminal, pip install web browser. Okay, so it's still
Question.
open.
What's the purpose of the headers?
Oh, this one here. So the headers is going to set up the information that it needs to make your request. So when you are contacting an API, they typically want to make sure that you're verified. They don't leave it open. Otherwise, you could pound their REST API with a ton of requests, which would end up flooding their web server, causing a denial of service. So that's the reason they usually make you subscribe and use a key, and you only get so many results that can come back. So these headers allow you to set these variable names in the request that you're submitting to them.
Okay.
And you're submitting this request to them to this URL that's up here at the top.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. And then the query string, which is what you're querying off of. In this case, it's an API key. Other times, this will be extra information that you want to search for. So a lot of times you'll have to do this. What product do you want? You gather all this information, then you build out this query string based on what you're wanting to search for.
Okay.
So if we did this one here, let me just restart this because I changed the name here. And I do keys. If all goes well, it automatically launches out to that Amazon key. And that's the top result that came back when I searched for keys. And you can even see up here, the keys got sent up in the search and it took me out to this page. All right. And so kind of what you were asking there before, it's not ideally what you're saying, because what they're looking for here just tells us what that price is for that particular result, right? If we were to take out price, which is an integer, and say we wanted to store that for the first 10 that came through. So if you'll notice, 0 gave me the first result. If I want to do a for loop, I would do something like for I in range of 0 to 10. If you guys remember, actually 11, right? That gives me the first 10 results. That's fine. It's 10. And then I need to essentially put this here. This result gives me the URL. And instead of URL, if I used price, I believe that's what the output was. Let's look again. Price. Yeah, price gives me specifically an integer. Okay. And we could even set this to price equals that. And then say we have price list. We have an empty list. And instead of printing this result that comes back from this user, we could just do something like price list dot append. And we're going to append whatever that price is to that list. And that will do it for the first 10. And to do that, we just take out the 0 and put I. So now we're back to scripting like we've done in the past. And that should allow us to put all 10 of those results into price list. And then from there, we could even do like a average price for the first 10 items in the result of a keys, right? So we would take each one of these lists and add them together. So instead of adding this to a list, we could even do average price equals 0. And instead of appending this, we would say average price plus equals whatever the result was for each one of those. And then at the end, we could get our average for that. So print the average price for the first 10 results is And if you remember in here, when we use our F statements in order to print that out nice and clean. So inside this F statement, we would have average price divided by 10. There you go. So now we could run something like this request. And we say keys. And it would go and retrieve all that from the result and then take those first 10 results, add them all up, divide by 10, and we get 8.282. And if we used round so that we would make sure that that goes to the nearest 2 points, we could take this value there and whoops, not there, and go to 2 decimal places. That would round it out. So if I play this again, notice every time I'm hitting go, it's essentially using one of my requests. So when you're first playing around, you kind of want to just play with the local data, and you could do that. So in the new search, the first 10 results goes to 7.7. All right. Do you guys have any questions so far on how to play with that kind of data?
So what if we wanted to kind of put this into a flat file like a CSV or something like that, so that we could, I guess, maybe export it to a data visualization like Power BI or something? Would we be able to transform the data as far as like make our columns like the average price, how many units are sold, and the time frame that they're sold in?
100%. So that will actually, what you're looking to do, is going to be something. Let me just pull this over here. And learning modules. You are going to be looking towards something that we're going to do here in data frames. That allows us to take the data out of that API, put it into a data frame, which we could then either send out to a, like you said, Power BI and Microsoft. In this case, I'm going to show you how to do it in Streamlit, which will help build out those visualizations, graphs, etc. When you pull this in here in NumPy, SciPy, and this one, it's where you're going to manually create those graphs, and then you'll see the beauty of using frameworks like Streamlit in order to automatically generate those for you.
Oh, okay.
So, short answer, yes, we will be doing something like that in the coming weeks. Absolutely. And for now, like this, where I'm storing this information in this product, I could be saving this locally so I don't have to keep running that request every time. So for example, if I save this one and this is my result, right? What I could do is then move that over to the other files. So if you guys remember, in Python 360, we showed you how to save things to other files. Let's pretend I ran that request, and that's what's over here, an example, right? We could say this is result equals, right? And this is now going to store all that information. So instead of example, let's call this example.py. Okay. And so now I have this result and I have all this dictionary information inside of it. Instead of me actually having to go out and do this request, which is this line here, I could simply say up at the top, import, or better yet, we could do from example, import response. And this will now be response, not result. Actually, result's fine. Let's call this result. And so now all my other code is going to run as we would expect it to, other than this product, right? We're going to always assume at this point I'm wanting keys so that I can play with this data. And now if I run it, it's going to be really, really quick because it's just using the local data that I stored here in this result. This is the simple way to get familiar with playing with APIs. Long term, you would store that information in a database with different columns, headings, etc., kind of like what you were talking about, in order to do better visualizations with it. For now, we're just extracting data that we're interested in. And here we're just printing the result for this average price. You may only want to deal with that price information that comes out of here, for example. If that's the case, then you can build your own dictionary or list in your own code that would store that information so that you don't have this massive dictionary of information. You only have the dictionary you care about, which has the information you want. So just price alone probably isn't beneficial. You may want the name of whatever this ad is. So here's the name of what it is. And then you may want to store the price. You may want to store even the stars value, things like that. And you could build a real quick website that would search Amazon without all the extra fluff. So you wouldn't have all this busy screen and everything on it. You could just build a quick web app that would show you exactly what you want to see. Did this help at all for those of you that were asking about all that?
Yeah, this
Yeah.
is really great.
Okay. So
Pretty
again,
much.
the more examples you guys have of this kind of stuff, it makes more sense than me just talking about API requests and things like that, right? It's much more fun to kind of explore what's out there. Now, in your case, you were looking for product details, and so let's go ahead and test this endpoint to get the result of what this would look like if we looked for a specific item. And let's see what results would come back from that. So in this, we can see all the product information. So this is the equivalent of me clicking on this. We have the about, we would have all this product description, etc. It looks like it pulls all of that out. What we would want, like what you were asking for, which is whether or not the pricing over time is kind of what you were asking for, right?
Yeah, we could do pricing over time or sales over time. Like, for example, maybe you wanted to know if vintage skeleton keys sell more in October. So that
Gotcha.
type of thing. Yeah.
So in this case, what comes over here based on what this particular API is scraping, it doesn't look like it's going to pull enough information for us to make those research questions where we could expose that.
So
It
how would we get, or would we just Google that as far as like Amazon data extractor that would give us date information, date versus price information?
Exactly. So you would have to use some tool that would allow you to track some of that going back. So one tool I know that could potentially do that would be something like Honey. Um, so let's see if Honey has an API. So Honey, if you're not familiar with that, this allows you to keep an eye on items that maybe you add to your Amazon cart over time, and it would allow you to see if that price has changed so that you can make an informed decision on that. So let me just see if I can pull that up here off my personal Amazon. Okay, and so let's look back at the key here. All right, and so I click on oh, it's fine. There you go. There's your skeleton keys. Okay, you'll notice I have a little pop-up that shows up over here on the right-hand side when it finishes loading. Right now, it's tagging the Honey API database. Okay, that did the cart. If I click on my Honey icon up here at the top, apologize. Evidently, me running a bunch of stuff in the background is causing it to be slow. But you can see even Honey gives us this here, right? It's going to tell me there was 3 price changes here within the last amount of time. And so if I mouse over that, it says within the last 30 days, there was 3 price changes. I can also see that in this drop down that came in, maybe I have discount codes, etc. But if I click on this and go to view price history, Honey keeps a database of this particular item and it will tell me what those prices were over time, right? So I can make an informed decision that, at this point in time, for whatever reason, it sold for 50 cents less than it did in the past. This is kind of a small result. We could go clear out to 120 days, and now we can see that that same key back in early December was selling for $15.99, with the latest being $7.99. So obviously there was some price gouging before Christmas, right? So, is this the kind of data that you're wanting to search out for?
Yeah, I mean, this would be really cool to do some like predictive analysis with too, where we could kind of maybe even compare the months versus what it's sold for.
Exactly. So the idea now is that we need to be able to get this data from some kind of API. So let's see if Honey happens to have an API. I'm sure they do. Let's see here. There we go. This may be it. This may be something completely different. Let's look. Um, oh, that looks like something a little different. Let's see here. Mobile app. Sometimes they'll have these things. Sometimes they don't offer that information up, right? Um, there we go. Okay. So this one has it, and they have a profile, property docs, postman. See if they actually have one. In this case, they do not seem to have an API to their information they can pull or endpoints. But you would be looking for something like Honey that's tracking that information so that you could go do research on what you're talking about. API tracker is going to be very similar to like Rapid API, where it just has all those different APIs in one solid place that you can go trace for it. So I apologize I couldn't answer your question directly, but it's not that it can't be done. We just have to go do more research to find an API to give us the data set that we're specifically looking for.
Yeah, that's no problem.
All right. So that's kind of what week 2 is going to really cover here. You can kind of see an API and demos. This is going to be me going through what our API is, kind of re-explaining what we did here, and then giving you some alternative demos. And I go through one student wanted to pull information about his Steam stats. Another one wanted to pull information from a website where they do competitions in games, like an esports website. And so we were trying to pull that information out as well. This one kind of relates again back into what APIs are, and then has some more examples as they go through it. And then it really gets you into API or Python Faker. And so I will create a new video on Wednesday that takes us through API Faker or Python Faker. One thing you'll need to know when you're doing requests and things like that is the HTTP status codes. So if you guys remember, you'll be getting 200s, mean it's okay. And if you go out to our Rapid API, let's just look at the one we were just looking at here real quick. I don't think I still have that open. Maybe I do. Up there. Yeah, Amazon Data Extractor. You'll notice that I got this 200 success, which meant that the request I put in here was successful. Sometimes you won't always get that. You might have a typo in your header or parameters that don't work. So for example, this application key, if I add extra fluff in here, let me see if I can do that. It's not going to let me do it inside this API. Better yet, let's do it here. This main. Make this back where we actually do our requests. There we go. Perfect. And so on this response, when we do this response going through here, you can generally look to make sure that the status you got back was a 200. So we're assuming everything works here, right? If we put this in a try and accept statement, we'll try to get this, see if we get status of 200. 200 means we're good. If we get a 404, we might have errors. So for example, if I put in this key and I add a bunch of extra stuff in here and I run this, we do something like keys. You'll notice nothing comes back in results, right? It's actually supposed to be a result, not results. Yeah, so actually we did get a response. So response is this, right? This JSON, but because we don't have results, because I put in this key, which then made sure that the request didn't work. So if I print my response.json, This is still going to error out, but we'll get it back. When I look at this, you'll see status code error 401. And that 401 means I have an unauthorized request. Make sure my API key is actually valid. So if you go back here, you'll look at all these options, everything I searched through, including my header information. It's basically saying that my API key up here at the top is not valid. And therefore you can go chase that down. We take that back out of there, run that again. And we actually get the full result like we would expect. Notice that it doesn't have a status code or any of that kind of stuff when we do the other side. So that's where it's always good to wrap these and try and accept. Make sure you get a status 200. If you do, then you can continue with the code. If not, then go ahead and raise that error and have it expel that error that's on the screen. That way you don't have programs that break, if that makes sense. All right. Went a little over on time. I apologize for that. I'm going to stop the recording here.